Okay, wonderful. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. And I saw that room behind you, Darren, and all of my my nostalgia for Butterfly Pavilion came up. I'm so excited to have a few minutes to talk to you a little bit about my background and passion. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Thank you. Okay, so my name is Parker McMullen Bushman. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the Extension Director for City and County of Denver. I also wear a variety of different hats. So I work with different organizations throughout the state of Colorado, local, and I'm on a number of local and national boards. I always like to share with folks my beautiful family. Me and my husband are environmental educators at heart. So we named our kids after trees. So this is cypress, cedar, and conifer. You can see that we've got a real tie to the land. And I have had over a 23-year career in environmental education. So I've had the opportunity to work in environmental organizations all over the United States. And 4 years ago, I was lucky enough to be able to come to Colorado and take a position with Butterfly Pavilion. Because my career has been so diverse and has really centered in the environmental conservation and outdoor recreation movements and areas of work, a lot of people have asked me, how did you get here? And they weren't like asking, did I fly that day or jogging? They were really wondering, how did I, as a woman of color, make it into a field where not a whole lot of people looked like me? And, you know, it wasn't a silly question because I was often on staff like these, where I was the only person of color on the staff. And so I started to wonder, that kind of fueled my passion of trying to figure out, where are my people at, right? Where are other people that looked like me? So I started thinking about where my love of nature came from. I always point back to this woman. This is Judy McMullen, my mother. And my mom grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, on a farm and had a real love of the outdoors. She moved to New York, where she met my father, and they had 3 kids. And they spent a lot of time getting us into outdoor spaces, whether it's climbing trees or taking picnics. You would think that with that kind of role model in my life, that I was, I knew that I was going to be in the outdoor industry, environmental education, but I actually didn't, because I never thought of myself as being outdoorsy. I didn't see myself reflected in those things. And when we look at who is represented in a lot of conversations around outdoor usage, we see that we represent predominantly people that look one way, right? White folks and folks doing adventure and folks kind of out on their own. And to me, my time in the outdoors looked a little bit different. And so it took me a while to make that connection. I actually went back to school. I got my master's in natural resources with a focus on interpretation and environmental education, because I wanted to understand, how do communities see themselves in environmental messages? How do they understand that these things are for them as well? That's also when I formed Eco Inclusive. Over my years of studying this and thinking about this, I've learned a couple of different things about, how do we start to think about making access and enjoyment of the outdoors equitable. I've learned that representation is vital and really important to outdoor goals and to getting people involved in this message. I've learned that it's important to build a connection around what the community really is interested in hearing, right? And the work that we do. And I've learned that culturally competent organizations are able to do all of these things better. So representation is really important, right? People want to see themselves represented in organizations. We know that our demographics in the United States are changing drastically. In 3 years, by 2023, more than half of all children are going to be minorities. We can see that there's been a very large shift from the last 30 years of our population demographics to the next 30 years. You can see that our non-Hispanic white population is getting smaller, while our Hispanic, Latinx, Latino population is getting larger. And by 2050, it is estimated that we will be a majority minority population. So that's the next 30 years. However, we still haven't caught up with the changes in the last 30 years because conservation organizations do not have the number of people of color in them that are representative of our community, of our society. You can see this was taken from the Green 2.0 report that came out a couple of years ago, and it shows that we do much better at getting in diversity in our frontline positions. But as you move your way up into positions of leadership, we have less and less diversity among our staff. And so it's really important for us to think about, okay, we see that demographics are changing. Why should diversity be important to us as individuals and as organizations? Well, when we think about our environment, we know that we've got huge environmental problems to solve, right? And in order to solve it, we need everyone at the table. In his book Collapse, How Societies Choose to Fall or Survive, Jared Damon said that there are 4 reasons why societies fail: failure to anticipate a problem, failure to perceive a problem, failure to solve a problem, and failure to solve despite attempts. Right? Well, we are working at this diversity problem, but we're not seeing a whole lot of movement. I also think about the environmental justice movement and equity, right? Environmental justice movement exposed disparities that we see in who bears the brunt of environmental issues. The environmental justice movement was started by primarily people of color who wanted to address the inequities of environmental protections. So we're seeing a trend where the people in environmental organizations that are helping to make policy, that are really helping to teach the community, are not representative of that community. And the community that they're not representing is the community that is the most hardest hit by environmental disparities, right? So fair treatment means that no one group should bear a disproportionate amount of the negative effects, environmental consequences. However, 30 years ago, Robert Bullard wrote a book, Dumping in Dixie, and talked about that race class divide in environmental issues. And we see that still 30 years later, there is still a gap between who is making pollution and who is facing the consequences from that pollution made. Study after study after study show that we don't breathe the same air, that people of color are exposed to more toxins and pollution each year than white folks, right? And this graph is really impactful because it talks about if people of color were exposed to the same amount of pollution as white folks, it would mean that they could live longer, have a better quality of life, right? But that is a problem in the community. And so it gives the saying, I can't breathe, a whole new meaning. Not only are people with marginalized identities oppressed by social systems, but they're also the recipients of poor environmental quality and health. And when you can tell the socioeconomic or racial profile of a neighborhood by how many trees are planted, by their access to fresh and healthy foods, or their proximity to pollution sites, we have an issue. Which when someone says they can't breathe, they're saying they are lacking an essential function to live a healthy, successful life. So that's why justice matters when we talk about the environment and environmental education, because the environment impacts everything: where we live, where we work, where we play, where we learn, where we worship, where we shop. And research and demographics have shown that disturbing trend that exposure to um, poor environmental outcomes is predictable by race, right? So we have to understand we are all a part of a shared ecosystem. And in that ecosystem, no person, no place can be sacrificed, or we all will suffer. We're being called upon to join forces with leaders envisioning a healthier, more equitable future where everyone has clean water and everyone feels safe outdoors. Black lives are cherished, Indigenous rights and lands are respected. We can have that all as a part of the work that we do in the environment. Loving our neighbor as our own means that we understand that our future is interconnected with the futures of others. And that's what led me to community organizing, to environmental education, really as a whole. I think that the disparities that we talked about earlier should serve to remind us that environmental education itself, the act of environmental education, is an act of social justice. All right. So just by educating our public, by educating our community, we are doing an act of social justice because it involves values and visions. Environmental education for school children can help students develop the habits of thinking about how the world around them is shaped, thinking about how they live. The work of environmental educators is to nurture a disposition towards empathy, towards ecological consciousness, engaging inquiry in the world around you, and collaborations. These are the same dispositions that brace up a just and equitable community. They are the heart of community organizing and community activism. Environmental educators have a really unique role in instilling a sense of environmental justice in their students. When we empower students to think and use inquiry and scientific methods to think about their environment, then they are empowered to then have a voice, to be proactive about the injustices that they see in the environment around them. This helps to create communities of resistance, of planning, of change around those environmental issues. I think that we have to make environmental education culturally relevant to our community. We have to advocate for children, families, and inclusive community education. And we have to acknowledge the broader social implications that impact the lives of students, families, and communities. I'm thinking, I'm no longer with the Butterfly Pavilion, but one of the proudest projects that I got the opportunity to start working on was an exhibit they're creating called Azteca. And it made me think about how when we decided to do this project, we said, the Butterfly Pavilion is doing science all over the world. We want to bring that science to the public in a way that is really relevant to their wants. We held focus groups, we talked to community members, we got into communities that we wanted to reach, and we said, what do you want to know more about? Communities said, we want to know about monarchs. migration, right? And we said, what would be relevant to you about monarch migration, about invertebrates? And we reached out to community members in the Latinx community because we wanted to reach that community. And we got this great feedback about Day of the Dead and how monarchs traveling back every year, how they were told by their relatives and by their grandparents that the monarchs were their ancestors returning every year to do that. And that happened at the same time as the migration. They already had this cultural tie to a scientific event. And we were able to partner with local schools, with Latinx artists, with the Mexican Cultural Center, the Latino Culture and Arts Center, the Mexican Consulate, Museo de las Americas. We had a bunch of community partners that we worked with to craft a very relevant story that took the science story of invertebrates and made it relevant to our community. As environmental educators, that is what we are charged to do, right? Science, we have science, and we have, we know that education around pollinators, educations around healthy landscape, education around plants is really necessary. And if we are willing to find those community connections that bring it to life for all communities, right, we can start to bring everyone to the table. I know that this year, 2020, I think has thrown all of us for a loop. There is not one person that I know of that has been unscathed by 2020. And these can seem like really scary times, but I think, and I know that we can thrive together. Moments such as these can amplify and lay even more bare the structural inequalities, the societal impacts of bias, and relationships between power and privilege. But I'll tell you something, this is a brave new world. We can create spaces where everyone can breathe. We can create spaces where everyone can have access to healthy air and healthy water. As organizations whose touch points are the environment, children, the community, and the outdoors, we have an opportunity to reimagine what we do and how we do it. We've already done that as we've pivoted, right, to education and teaching in the land of COVID. So we have the opportunity to think about what are things that we can do now for equity, for education that we have never done before. And I believe that we can make it happen in a real powerful, meaningful way. So with that being said, I want to thank you all for having me here today. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Let's see if I got this right. Okay, I think so.
You're good. Parker, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. We have just a minute for any questions for Parker. If you want to go ahead and put those in the chat. You're getting lots of great comments, lots of people excited about what you're talking about. I'm going to wait just a minute to see if we're getting any questions though. And if you don't have questions right now, again, we'll have a much longer time to do questions for all of the panelists. You're getting lots and lots of thank yous. Thank you, Parker. Thanks, Parker. Thank you very much.
I see
okay.
That. Thank you.
Do you see that coming in? Okay, good.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Okay, so thank you, Parker.